Hello and welcome to the second in the series of TGO planning videos. In this video we're going to have a look at the various starting points that we can use. We'll discuss a little bit about the merits of each, and then we'll branch on and look at how we move on from the starting point to begin to plan a route. Now, these videos are coming in between 10 and 20 minutes. This one's probably going to be a little longer because it's probably at the longer end of that scale, 15 to 20 minutes, because I've decided to string two subjects together because I think it just works better that way. So in the introduction, the photos you saw there were all taken on day one of a challenge. That gives you an idea of some of the variety of the scenery that you'll see. In front of us we have the map, which has Toyden at the top, and actually you have to scroll down a bit to see Oban and Adrisheg at the bottom. I'm going to concentrate on the top portion here. Some of these starts are clustered very close together, but each of these starts has a very different feel about it, and they exploit very different alternatives really in TGO's starting. So let's just have a look at Mallaig here. Now we've got three starting points here that look very close to each other, and they're all accessed via the train line that runs from Fort William to Mallaig. So you've got Mallaig, you've got Moar, you've got Lakayat. But each of these starts has a very different characteristic. So, for example, in Mallaig, nearly everybody starts by taking the ferry over to the Knoydart here, to Inverie, and then walking east. The Knoydart is one of the most isolated areas of the Highland. There's no road access into these little villages and settlements here. So it's really quite a hill walker's paradise, really. So for many people, starting in the Knoydart is a big thing. They want to do that. In fact, I started my first challenge here because I'd not been to the Knoydart at that point. Moar, further south, is a different start too, because it opens up access to the ridges along here or along here, and it's a very different feel. You maybe join up with the Mallaig routes a bit further, or Mallaig, as I think you should say, further east. But it's a different starting point to Mallaig or Mallaig, although it's only a few miles away. I should just say I'm useless at Scottish pronunciation, so if you're a fervent Scot, many apologies. I love you to bits, but I can't pronounce the language. Lakayat, which is a little bit further down the train line, is interesting because that too kind of links up with the routes of the other two, but not quite so quickly. So it gives you more variety in the first days. So some people choose to take this kind of route here. When I did the Lakayat start, I think we went kind of directly over these hills here, which was wonderful. For 2 days, we virtually saw no sign of human habitation or human life. So although these starts are clustered together, they're very different in style and tone. Let's just get back and have a look at them all again. Now, so how do we choose which one we do? Well, let's just look at some of the features of them. So the first thing I want to look at is really distance. So here we've got some of the most northerly start points, Toyden, Strathcowan, Plockton, Dorney and Shield Bridge. Now these are all start points where you could easily end up crossing the Great Glen at Drumnadrochit using the ferry that we talked about in the last video. You'll see though that the distances are different. So for example, Shield Bridge is quite a short crossing to Drumnadrochit, as is Strathcowan. Plockton and Toyden are a little further away. Now, because we're walking across high mountains, that may even mean another day to your journey. So Toyden, which is I think my favourite start, I've done it twice, I tend to get to the Great Glen a day later, or if not, I'm walking much longer days. So the distance is an impact. So planning your first challenge, you might want to take it a bit easy in the way that I did when I did my first challenge, partly because I wanted to understand how the terrain worked and how the challenge worked. So you might not be on your first challenge looking at one of these longer routes. That being said, I've met people who've done their first challenge and started at Torridon and Strathcowan quite happily. It depends a lot on you and your confidence. And I should say very early on that there's no better start point or worse starting point. It's your individual choice, and it's to do with your experience of Scotland, how confident you feel. You can always come back and do the event again and start from somewhere else. So just a consideration, there's no right or wrong in this. Each of these start points has its own merits and its own features. So if we drop down again and we look at those challenge routes that would link into Fort Augustus, again you can see the difference in time and distance, really. So that's Mallaig, although that should really only start here because this is the Knoydart. Glenelg, Plockton here. Shield Bridge, now this is an interesting one because it's a pretty short distance. So as the crow flies, this is, let's see if we can pull this up and have a little look. Shield Bridge is this route here. It's 44 kilometres compared to 56, 60 for some of the others. So it's a shorter route. And because it's a shorter route, this is probably the most favoured route for first-time challengers. It's the route that allows you quick access to the hills along decent tracks, not any real overland navigation to be done. If you want to see how Scotland works, you want to build up your confidence, this is a good start. The downside of it is a very, very busy start. And the other feature of it is that you're in and out of the Highlands very quickly. And that might be a consideration for you. I did my first challenge from Mallaig, crossed over the ferry to the Knoydart and set out. It was lovely weather and I went like the clappers. And in fact, I think my first 3 days in 2. But I can distinctly remember leaving the Knoydart and thinking, actually, I really want to turn around and go back because I've moved through the high mountains so quickly. I did actually. I came back in the summer and spent 5 or 6 days just hiking around the Knoydart. But a crossing like Shield Bridge, while it builds up the confidence and builds up the understanding of Scotland, you're in and out of those high hills pretty quickly. So that's a consideration to have with you. So for first-time challengers, Shield Bridge is obviously a consideration. I'd also consider Mallaig because it's a great start. You'll meet lots of nice people. Strathcowan also, or Dorney are good starts too. So distance is one of the features you might be considering. So moving on, I'm going to just have a little look at that Mallaig start for you to give you a feel for how then, once you've chosen your starting place, how then we move onwards. So here's Little Inverie, which features, I think, the most isolated pub in Britain. And this line here is the ferry route that comes in from Mallaig. And you'll see as we look, there are 2 major routes out here. There's this one and there's this one here. So we can get a better look at those here. There they are. And they set you up for a different route as you move on. So even if you decide to finish your challenge in Fort Augustus, these routes will get you there in a different way. So the first route at the top there, reasonably simple, straightforward climb. climbs high up to this Belak here at Man Barrisdale, 450 metres. Stunning views out to the west, and also stunning views to the east and the northeast as well. And then it drops down to this beautiful, beautiful bay, Barrisdale Bay, which is just a fabulous place if you catch it in good weather. The second route here runs to this bothy at Sowleys Bay. Again, high mountain climb here, bit of a pass, and then dropping down, walking through this estuary here of reed beds, which is a bit damp, and then into Sowleys bothy itself. In fact, you can walk further than this in a day. On my first challenge, I ended up here somewhere camping, but the weather conditions are great, and I just wanted to keep walking. But there's some interesting camping spots along here. Barrisdale, you can walk a bit further on your first day. Around here, this coastal walk. The further you get along this, though, the more limited camping spots are, so you're probably not going to go much further on, perhaps around here. This section here, when this section begins to climb, it's much more rugged. Of course, you'll always find a spot in which to sneak a small one-person tent in, but it gets a bit more challenging. So those are our two routes going out of Inverary. Now, they take us to different places. So how do we work out how to move on from there? Well, there's two methods that I want to talk about. First of all is something that you can only do with computer mapping. So what I've done is I've just taken that endpoint there at Sowleys and created a new route that just goes straight to Fort Augustus. And I've done the same from Barrisdale at the top. And if we zoom in, you'll see that they do slightly quite different and dramatic things. So this route at the top basically navigates Loch Coich to the north, and this route here cuts through the territory to the south of the loch. And they're distinctly different experiences. So that's one way of doing it. You can say, okay, I'm going to be crossing here for a few days. Let's just draw a direct line, and then as you begin to start to look at the map in terms of the routes through, that straight line gives you at least a guide of the direction or the way that you're going to go, and that's something that I use from time to time as a tactic. Perhaps a more better way of looking at it is to use the TGO Challenger's secret weapon, which is this book, The Scottish Hill Tracks. Now, I'd never heard of this before I tackled the challenge. It was the writer Chris Townsend that put me onto it, and it's a fabulous, fabulous book. Now, sadly, I seem to have lent my copy to somebody and it hasn't come back, so I can't demonstrate to you how it works. But inside the cover of the book is a pull-out map. Just a very simple map, just a bit bigger than a sheet of A4 paper. And this simply has the highlands on it, and it has the main rights of way on there, or the old drove routes in lines, and they're all numbered. So, for example, if we're looking at this area here, if I can get it magnified, this is Glenkingie. And you'll see how my diagonal line is taking me that way. So if I look to see where the natural line is, it's probably this track here. So I'm going to be tackling Glenkingie. So if I look at my hill tracks little map, that's marked on it, and it's marked with a number. And all you do is simply go into the main book and look up the description for that number. And the description will tell you about the route. It'll talk to you about hazards. It'll talk to you about maybe where there's a river crossing, and if that river's in spades, it will give you some idea as to where to go as an alternative to cross that river. If there's a bridge in a state of decay, it'll tell you that. It's a very simple thing. So basically, you use the little map to just join the dots. And for each of those little sections, there's a descriptive piece of text in hill tracks, which is really, really helpful. If you don't know the Scottish Highlands, it's by far the most significant thing that you can do. So that's Scottish hill tracks. Have a look at it, and for a first-time challenger, I would seriously recommend getting hold of that book. I used it quite a bit on my first 2 or 3 challenges. I don't think I've used it since then. But when I've been back to Scotland for 5 or 6 day trips, I'll often dig it out and have a look. It's a fabulous, fabulous resource, really. Very clever, very simple, but devastatingly effective. Right, now the other thing you might want to be thinking about are accessing the high hills. Now, if you're a really keen Munro bagger, and part of the attraction of the challenge is to knock off as many Munros as you go, then probably you know what you're doing already. But for those of us that aren't, we might like the option of nipping up the odd hill or two while we're walking. Now, this is obviously a section of the walk in the early stages of the challenge in the northwest. And on a number of occasions, I've set out to do these hills, and maybe the weather hasn't been good, or it doesn't feel right on the first day or whatever. So one of the things I do now, and I know other challengers do a similar thing, I plot my route along the hill tracks or the major rights of way, as we've just been doing. And then I look to see, after I've done that, I look to see where the hills are. So if we just magnify this a little bit here and pull it across, from the top of Manbarresdale, 450 metres, it's a relatively straightforward walk to Lunben, I think it's called, but it probably isn't, so apologies. And that's a reasonably easy walk to do. So you could, if the weather's good and you're feeling fine, nip up to Manbarresdale, take in that hill, drop down, and then finish your walk. Similarly, we can do the same thing for Larderben here. Now, this walk I've done off the challenge, and it's a great, great walk. Probably one of my favourite little stretches of walk in the Highlands. It's a bit further from that main path, but one of the things you can do is to plot a route round and down through the crags, and then walk across this bit here down to Barrisdale itself. It's a much bigger day, obviously, and you will find, as you skate around and you look at different Munro books, which I'll come to in a minute, you will find people have sketched out that route for you. So that's the way I would do it. I'd look at my major route through, and then I look to see what options there are either side. One of the features that you have to think about if you're doing that are the access routes. So that brings us to some of the other guides here. Now, there are a few guidebooks that I think are really useful. First of all, there are 2 sets of guidebooks for the Munros. There are those 2 volumes produced by Cicerone, great books, and there's another book produced by Helen and Paul Webster, some friends of mine, which is a fantastic book as well. And both of these books will show you the alternatives you have for walking up hills. So there's never just one way of doing that. There are always some options. But the descriptions are kind of useful because they kind of help you think about, is this a hill that it's really appropriate to tackle from this particular starting point? So I'd look at those. And then I'd also recommend getting hold of Chris Townsend's Cicerone Guide to Scotland. It's part of their almost encyclopedic guidebooks. This is a fantastic book. It's not cheap. It's as thick as a house brick. but it details every region of the Highlands, and it will also give you those approach routes, not only for the Munros, but the smaller hills, the Corbetts and so on, and that can be really useful. If you think you're going to be walking quite a bit in the Highlands over the years, then the Chris Townsend book is really something that's worth buying. Highly, highly recommended. So, armed from the information of these 3 books, Scottish Hill Tracks, the Munro books, and the Chris Townsend books, they can really help you think about walks. There are other books as well that are worth looking at. So when I did my first challenge, I went into one of these cut price bookstores, and I found a couple of books by Cameron McNeish that were about his favourite walks in the Highlands and also Munros. Actually, the favourite walks in the Highland book was quite good, because these were basically hill track routes worked around hill tracks, but there were great photographs in them. And again, the descriptions of the walking routes were really helpful. So scour around and use as many resources as you can do, but certainly Scottish Hill Tracks you should snap up. And finally, in this section, let's just have a look at following a walk through and the different stages of it, just to give you a feel for some of the kind of decisions you might make here. So this is effectively the walk to from the Knoydart through to Fort Augustus. Let's just bring that up, magnification a little bit. So here's Sowley's Bay. A lot of people stop here, so it's a nice, gentle first day. Gets you into the mountains. You've got lots of company when you stop in the evening, whether you stay in the bothy or camp outside. And some people move on. And as I said, I camped about here the first time that I was in this area. There's also a rather nice bothy just here as well, which some people would prefer. I've stayed in that bothy, but off the TGO challenge. So really, your first day depends on how ambitious you are, how fit you are. I know some people taking some of the hills to the north and the south here. But basically, that's a decent day. If you're walking here, that's a fair day. If you're walking on to Glen Desiree in one day, that's quite a big day for first day in the hills. But of course, deciding where you stop then has a knock-on effect on the rest of the journey. So, let's just move on a little bit. So the second day of my trip, or the next part of any trip on this route, climbs here, takes this overland stretch up into Glenkingie. There's a bothy here at Kinbrake, which again is quite convenient for some people. I didn't stop here, I kept moving on. And then Glenkingie drops down into forest. Now remember in the previous video I talked a bit about how the landscape changes. So at this point on the Upper Kingie, everything is changing and we're into forests. Walking through these forests here, past this hydroelectric plant. And then camping here. There's a hotel here which certainly the last time I was in this area 2 years ago was being refurbished, and I was unsure whether it was going to be another hotel or residential property. But I know other TGO challengers have just found somewhere to camp in and around here. There's a little church with a little village green. I think at least one or two intrepid challengers have set their tent up in the grounds, but just out of view of the road, really. I'll maybe talk about wild camping locations a bit later on in the series. But in Scotland, more or less, you can camp anywhere you want, so long as you're out of, you're not disturbing people in terms of their views. And people are pretty tolerant as well. along the major routes, a lot of the communities know the TGO challenge is going through in these time periods. So, people aren't too fazed by waking up and finding a tent somewhere they wouldn't normally see either. So somewhere around there is a favourite stopping point as well. And then we move on. Now, to go to Fort Augustus, we can start traipsing down here and taking these tracks over here, but we're using a road there. So my routes, and those of a lot of people that I've seen, tack slightly to the south and go through this forest here, which is quite reasonably pleasant walking. And then crossing the river here at White Bridge, there's a superb campsite here at Fakem. Really, really gorgeous campsite. Now from there to Fort Augustus on the last day of the trek, it's possible to take this track here, across overland, and then take these forest tracks into Fort Augustus. Now, I have to say, I've planned to do that on 2 challenges, and the last challenge, 3 of us couldn't find this track out here. So because we'd had a few good days in the hills, and because we wanted a little bit of chat and a natter and a catch up, so I was walking with my partner Kate and my challenge mate Rob Slade, who I hadn't seen for a few years. We just ambled down here to Invergary, walked up this road. There was a track marked here and we couldn't find it now. I used that on my first challenge, but it seems to have gone. So we walked up this road here, across the bridge, and then just took the Great Glen Way towpath all the way into Fort Augustus. And we had a lovely day, very fast walking. We were in Fort Augustus for lunchtime, had a nice lunch. And it was a big contrast from the first couple of days, banging over the hills. This day was a sociable day, catching up with a friend and having some time in Fort Augustus to meet other people and do some resupply and have some good food. So there are some things to think about in terms of route planning. If I go back to my start points, these routes all have different characteristics. Very probably, for a first-timer, you'll be looking at these routes here, Dorney, Shieldbridge, and then probably to the south, Meleg, and so on. But it's your choice. There's no right or wrong choice. It depends on your level of confidence, your level of experience, maybe your level of fitness, and it depends very much what you want to get out from the challenge. There are people who want to knock off as many Munros as they can as they walk about across Scotland, but actually they're in the minority. Most people are just looking to enjoy the landscape and to see something of Scotland for themselves. And for a first challenge, or the first couple of challenges, a lot of us are using that to really understand how Scotland works, both in terms of planning the event and then walking it. And finally, I should say that actually the picking of the start point for me is the hardest part of route planning in the challenge. Because obviously, once you've decided where you're going to start from, all things flow from that. I chose Meleg for my first challenge, simply because I used to work with a guy who was a Scot, and he was constantly telling me that the train journey from Glasgow or Fort William up to Meleg was one of the best train journeys in the world, and I'd never done it. So I thought, okay, that solves that problem. I'll take that route, and then everything flowed from that. So it's your choice. A variety of starts. They're all very, very different. And use hill tracks to get you on your way, on the major rights of way. And then when you've done that, if you fancy going high a bit, then use those other guides to make sure you've plotted the right access route up. And I just say that with a bit of caution, because you might just find, while there is an access route up that hill from your main track, actually most people do it from a different approach. And what the guidebooks will do is they will explain to you the merits and a sense of the degree of difficulty of each of those climbs. So there you go, starting points. And in the next video, I'm going to take a look at the tricky subject of navigating over open, featureless land.